Good morning, Senate Agriculture back in action. We are continuing through. We just met with all the people that we work for, the Agriculture Department. Very interesting, and we're discovering as a new committee that we have a lot of ground to cover. And there's a lot of it's not just milking cows and tapping trees. We are going to meet again with the food security group. We have seen Carrie before. She's bringing a whole, and Maddie, and we're bringing a whole nother group of folks in. So welcome. How are you?
Thank you.
What would you like to tell us today?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Becca Warren. I live in Heartland. I'm a member of the Aquatic Center. And I represent the Vermont Food Security Roadmap Coalition, and I'm really pleased to be with you all today at the beginning of your session and just help you understand a little bit about the roadmap and any way that we can be helpful to your decisions this term. And with me today, Carrie Schuyler of the Vermont Food Bank. Am I allowed to introduce everybody?
Yeah, please. You have the floor. You do whatever you'd like.
So these are coalition members. We
Yeah.
have Autumn Mullen from Hunger Free Vermont, and Maddie Kempner and Grace Odell from NOFA, and myself. And so today we're just going to introduce the food security roadmap to you and give a little overview about how you might be able to use it this session. And I have copies if I have permission to hand those out to anyone who doesn't have them.
Yeah.
My Post-its. I don't know why.
I don't hand those out.
I don't think they're mine. So we're here to talk with you because the roadmap is the direct result of legislative statute. And it came out of and is in service to the work of this Senate Agriculture Committee, among other committees. And it's a tool, as I said, that you can use to make policy choices. So Carrie's going to be our MC here. Didn't see my speaker notes.
Well,
okay, we can go to the next one.
So you can look at it right here, Becca.
Oh, so fancy. Okay, so just an overview. This is what we're just going to go over today. So just a little bit about the food security roadmap to 2035, then talking a little bit about the status of food security in Vermont. So just give you an understanding of what we currently know about the complex issue of food security, and then talking about the policy requests that will be before you this session that could keep us on the road to food security. So that's what we'll be talking about. Yeah.
Tell us what food security means.
Exactly. A perfect question. So with this roadmap, we use the United Nations framework for food security, which is slightly more holistic than the United States definition, USDA definition. And that is basically, we will know we are food secure in Vermont when everybody in Vermont has the food they need all the time. And that everyone is assured of economic access to their food that they need and want, physical access to the food they need and want, and social access. So we like that United Nations framework because it tells us when we'll know there is food security rather than focusing on the lack of food security, really. And one thing about the roadmap is it really takes very seriously this idea both of all people having all the food that they need and want, so not leaving anybody out, not leaving anyone behind into that dignified future. And the other is thinking about at all times. So that's not just day to day, but thinking about, we're experiencing our new weather patterns. So do people have food when Barry's flooded? Do people have food when their farm is, washed down the river, when the farm they've been getting food from is washed down the river? So thinking about preparedness, resiliency, agriculture, our agriculture as an asset. Just thinking about all those things and so it's very related to a lot of different areas of legislation, not just agriculture, but we do put agriculture at the center.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking. So my first step here is I'm going to orient you to why we're here in Senate Ag, our first visit as a coalition. So this is a diagram from page 14 of the roadmap, which shows you how the roadmap relates to the Farm to Plate Investment Program, which was created through legislative statute. And so the legislature commissioned the roadmap basically through the agriculture and food system strategic plan. So this you'll be hearing much more about the Farm to Plate investment program and the Farm to Plate network in the next few weeks. Probably the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund Farm to Plate team will come in here and give you an overview and give you more background on that. And that can be kind of a deep dive. So this is really just to show you that the legislature created the Farm to Plate investment program, directed the state through the Jobs Fund to increase sustainable economic development and create jobs in the farm and food sector, to improve soils, water, and resiliency in the face of climate change, and to improve access to healthy local foods for all Vermonters. So the Jobs Fund and the Agency of Agriculture collaborated together and made the 10-year strategic plan for agriculture in Vermont. And I don't know if you all have a copy of that yet, but it's a large document that'll be coming your way. It really outlines what can be done to enhance our agricultural economy in the state. The roadmap came out of that strategic plan. So we're looking at the strategic plan. One recognition was that we want food security for our neighbors, for ourselves. We don't really have a holistic, shared, collaborative approach for how we're going to get there. And so the roadmap process is directly related and provides a level of detail in this strategic plan. So I will say that I consider this the Agriculture Committee's roadmap, simply from my participation in building the roadmap and then coming in presenting it to this committee and the House Ag a year ago now, I think. So I'm ready. Thank you, assistant. So I just want to share that every time that we got to starting to work on creating the roadmap, and now that we're talking about moving forward with it, every time we meet, we pause before we meet and we think about that day in 2035 when there will be food security for everyone in Vermont. And I just want to invite you in this moment to try to imagine that day when we're standing in 2035 and we know that everyone in Vermont has food security and climate resiliency, and our agricultural sector is thriving and providing for our people. Imagining that hidden hunger no longer exists in Vermont because we all have the food we need. And what are those possibilities when no one in Vermont is hungry? And just imagining that we've all worked together in our mutually supporting goals to create a Vermont where there's equitable Vermont food security, Vermont grown food security for all, and how fulfilled we're all going to feel to know that we made that day possible. And that really helps us keep moving forward in this project. So I'm just going to go a little bit into the roadmap itself right now. Carrying forward, yeah. So as I said, the food security roadmap came out of the agricultural and food system strategic plan, but it was also the need for a holistic statewide food security plan was also called for in the climate action plan and in the report from the Governor's Commission on the Future of Agriculture. These are all documents that came out 2020, 21, in those times when everyone was really thinking hard about what is going on with our food supply chain. Do we have the food that we need in the pandemic when national supply chains are getting more brittle? So then in 2022, with the support of the Department of Health and the Agency of Agriculture, a team of dedicated leaders within the Farm to Plate network assembled to design and implement a planning process to make this roadmap with a public engagement process. And we talked with over 600 Vermonters. There were over 120 organizations involved. Our approach was Vermonters know how to solve this issue in their own communities for their own families and neighbors. There's expertise in Vermont about the barriers and the successes that are going to work here. So let's get as much of that information as we can. And so then in the roadmap itself, you'll see there's goals, objectives, strategies, and those all come out of 2 years of talking to people across the state. And then those strategies either came out of those conversations or they already existed in another state planning document, like the climate action plan or the strategic plan, and they were affirmed by those public conversations. So Is this the one we're seeing now?
Yeah.
Great, okay, so then in the end, all that information was pulled into 3 goals that we're gonna work toward, and we know that when these goals are achieved, we'll have food security in Vermont. So then one of them is that communities have the tools to support food security. Another is that Vermont farms have the resources to be resilient. And another is that government ensures food security for all of Vermont. And so the puzzle piece, a very simple graphic just representing we need to have all these pieces together, and then we'll have that puzzle of food security solved. So at the end of the time of writing the roadmap, this group that you're seeing on our slide here was involved with sort of the final pieces of it and became very committed to deepening our collaboration and forming the Vermont Security Roadmap Coalition. And you will, as Mr. Chair, you recognize you've already seen some of the coalition members in here.
Yes.
And we are, part of this slide is to let you know that when you see Carrie come in with the food bank, or you see Maddie come in with NOFA, they might mention the roadmap, they might mention the Roadmap Coalition, and that is reflecting this shared work that we're doing together, recognizing that food security has many components, especially in Vermont with our agriculture resource that we have, and that we're all working together on these policy choices that we're bringing to you. And I think we're ready for our next slide. Just wanted to give you an example because we started really working as a coalition with the roadmap goals last year, and we were able to make some progress. So I want to thank Senator Collmore, Senator Ingalls, because you all were part of just passing some of these items we have listed here. So last year we were able to appropriate funds for crop cash and farm share, support the Vermont Food Bank and its network of meal sites, food shelves, support Meals on Wheels, support the Land Access and Opportunity Board, Universal School Meals, Farm to School, recovery for flooded farms and businesses, which I think you might have just heard from the agency team, some details about how that occurred, just guessing. And then supporting Vermont 211 to maintain itself at 24/7, to come back to 24/7 service. I have one note I want to say about this Act 143, which is maybe a sort of more subtle achievement that we were able to make together with some of the committees in the State House, which was modifying the emergency management planning language to include food security as a planning consideration and include local food access points and organizations in the planning process for emergencies. And that was a new thing in the emergency management language that ended up being Act 143. So that was just incredibly exciting to get moving on that, more emergency preparedness related to food. And also in that bill was requested a report on the restaurant meals program, which is an option that the state can take to have SNAP recipients use their benefits at restaurants to allow more flexibility for people, which also relates to emergencies. So that is just a quick overview of the roadmap. I'm going to pass it to Autumn, who's going to talk about some of the current status of food security in Vermont.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question before? That's okay. First of all, thank you for being a member of the Aquatics.
Thank you. Thank you.
Why 2035?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah, why 2035? The reason that I asked this question is more that the road will always be changing with climate, with the amount of people, more or less, that are in the state. So the target will always be changing. Thus, why 2035?
Right. Well, one consideration is, I think, without choosing a target, we'll continue business as usual, and for many of our neighbors, that's not working for many of ourselves. So then another consideration is, what is the timeline where we know we need to be ready for things that are happening? And seeing when we started looking, when we started working on this project to build a collaborative path forward, we were in the pandemic. And so seeing that we don't have a lot of time left, and we're already learning what we can do to be effective in terms of creating food security during an emergency state, and we already have a lot of ideas about how to create food security in Vermont in the daily day-to-day. And so in thinking about that deadline we wanted to give ourselves, we thought, well, there's a high level of urgency. We're already on the road. We're doing a lot of things that are going to create food security in the state. And hearing from folks across the state, we can do this now. We can do it in Vermont. If it can be done anywhere, it can be done in Vermont. And this is what we need to get done. So hearing that urgency and thinking about, all right, let's move forward.
How do you measure it, that you're moving towards that 2035?
Such a great question.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to remember. I know that one of our UVM research teams was I think they were in House Ag yesterday. We have a lot of great research capacity in the state with a UVM research team that works on food security questions. And I think, so we have that asset here, and they're excited to work with us on creating measurements. And what is going to happen next in our presentation actually is going through some of the different data points that give us a picture. And I think what we'll be doing until there becomes another sort of like smaller data point we can collect, we'll be looking at all of these data points that you're about to hear about.
May I interject?
Of course.
It's a good question because actually one of the things called for in the roadmap is better data collection, and that the state needs to be responsible for that as the organization that works across sectors, both agriculture sectors and human services sectors, to understand people's experiences, to understand the experiences of farms. And so there is an opportunity, while we do have assets that can help us set those measurements, there is an opportunity to figure out how to collect that data with what frequency, who's responsible for that, and how that data informs decisions that you all are making here on a regular basis. And it is somewhat of a gap in the state at the moment. We do have a research team at UVM that does have a cadence of surveying that they do around food security issues. They are making their own choices about that and willing to work with other partners, but they are not funded by our work. They're not funded by the state. They're going out and getting grants to do, studies that they feel might be valuable to the state of Vermont. But I think, at one point, the Agency of Human Services was working to set up a whole set of data points that they would collect about population level data. That project, I think at some point was put on the back burner because I believe the pandemic happened and AHS was overwhelmed. But there have been attempts at different times for the state to really wrangle data that they have from hospitals and health systems, from different agriculture systems, from different organizations doing poverty relief work, to really try and put together a full picture of those experiences that Vermonters are having. Some of those measurements are things that we use on an ad hoc basis to try and help us form a clearer picture of what those sort of data levers are. But there is improvement to be made in that area.
I guess I share Senator Major's question as well. I was glad to hear him ask the question because I hope that we don't need to wait for anything for 2035 to make sure that it is secure and that we are reaching goals and all. And we're going to hear some statistics next. So, when you're hungry or there's a underserved part of your community that is such a basic need as being able to nutrient themselves, some people can't wait till 2035.
Right, and it is not the goal to wait to 2035. It is the goal to begin rolling in some of these changes immediately. How we measure the impact of those, I think, is a great thing for us to be thinking about together. None of our organizations are research organizations. We all do different aspects of work, but really by and large, there is the need for someone to hold that data piece and help all of us understand these impacts as the projects roll out and as the policies roll out and as this work is done.
Well, cool. Well, let's hear more.
Yeah, let's see what with this information that Autumn is going to present, if that kind of gives a little bit of a data picture, although it's going to be kind of a cluster of data. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Becca.
All right. Hi, my name is Autumn Moen. I'm the legislative policy lead at Hunger Free Vermont. Like Becca said, I'm going to get into a bit of context setting data. So I'm going to share both some quotes about how Vermonters are feeling as well as some data to kind of mesh those two things together. So as Becca was saying, we talked to lots of people while making the roadmap, and they shared how they were doing economically. So in this first quote, this person said, "Nothing would really change until poverty and economic inequality are shifted. People aren't only hungry because of inadequate food access programs." So this reminds us that all of the prongs of the roadmap are important. We need funding and expanding of food access programs, and that's incredibly important, but we also need to take steps to address the root causes of hunger, which are poverty and economic inequality. Because as this next person said, food insecurity is a function of financial insecurity. And this leads people to make decisions like on the quote on the right, "I'm down to eating one meal a day, so I don't need to choose between paying a huge energy bill or being able to eat." Go to the next slide. So to bring in a few numbers to give some context to this, according to the most recent JFO basic needs budget, fewer than half of single adult households in Vermont could meet their basic needs. So lots of people are struggling to afford the necessities. And why is that? Well, there's many factors, obviously, but to name a few, go to the next slide. Housing has become unaffordable for many Vermonters. Over half of both homeowners and renters pay an unaffordable rate for housing, which is defined as over 30% of their income. And on top of this, prices in Vermont are slightly above the national average. So when I say prices, this is an average price data gathered by the federal government that combines things like food, transportation, housing, medical services, things like that. Averaged prices are above the national average in Vermont, but wages are stuck below the national average. So our wages rank 32nd in the country and the second worst in New England. So our wages are not keeping up with the cost of living, and people are really feeling that. And then here's just a reminder as well that not everyone in Vermont experiences this equally. Vermonters of color experience higher rates of poverty, with Black Vermonters and Indigenous Vermonters facing twice the state average rate of poverty. So we know people are struggling economically, and we also know that this is directly related to food security. So to kind of, again, contextualize this food security piece, someone shared during the roadmap that we are your neighbors, we worked hard, we had illness or accidents, we are poor or poorer than we used to be, and we can't afford the food we need. Another person shared that no one should go hungry or not have access to healthy food options, again speaking to this piece of both hunger but also the access to healthy foods and that choice of making food decisions that align with their values and their goals. And then on this other piece on the right, someone shared that I think COVID and its lingering effects have shown that food security is not just about access, but also about supply chain resilience. And I think work on food security should take both into account. So you'll see that the roadmap does take multiple aspects of food security into account. So to get into a little food security data, since the end of pandemic government supports, food security is rising every year. Since 2021, the number of households at risk of hunger in the US has risen by 33%, and here in Vermont, 7.2% of households were at risk of hunger in 2021 compared to 9.6% in 2023. And those numbers aren't important. We don't need to memorize all the numbers or anything, but just to note that this trend is going upward, and that's not what we want to be seeing with food security in our state. And there is more recent data specifically on Vermont. As Becca was sharing, the UVM research team and Dr. Meredith Niles just released their report actually yesterday. So there's a lot of new data around food security in Vermont, and I'm sure they'd be willing to come in and speak to that if that's something that you're interested in. Okay. And these numbers align with high level of needs seen at Vermont Food Bank Network partners across the state. An average of 72,000 people use the Vermont Food Bank Network food access sites each month across the state. And Vermonters are also utilizing federal SNAP benefits. That's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. This is called 3 Squares Vermont in our state. 65,000 individuals receive 3 Squares benefits each month, equating to about 40,000 households.
Sorry.
That's okay. 3 Squares Vermont recipients, they can use their benefits on what's called an electronic benefits transfer card or EBT card. They can use those benefits to purchase groceries at the grocery store or at local farmers markets. So that's a little bit of context. Hopefully kind of situate us in the status of how Vermonters are feeling both economically and then specifically on food security. I'm going to pass it off to Maddie with NOFA to talk more about this like agricultural piece and give you some data on how that all weaves into it as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any questions? That's
I don't know if this is actually directed to you, but first of all, I'm gonna ask some questions that might upset somebody, but what I need to know is like, what you're doing is great, but how is it when we've seen this at our food bank, that they come in and collect food, but they pull in a $60,000 vehicle, that we don't pay attention to where they're spending their money, do we not?
So this is a question that I actually get with some frequency. So it is,
Because I know the people that you're really aiming for do need it. And food security sometimes is mismanagement of your funds rather than, and how do we address that?
I think there are, so from my perspective and the perspective of the Vermont Food Bank, why people come to a food access location to receive free food is because they need it. No one is really showing up, at this point, there's still enough stigma around showing up at a location to receive free food that most people aren't showing up just because they feel like this is free and I can do whatever I want. In talking to neighbors at a lot of our Veggie Van Go events, which are drive-through, so you get to see everybody's car. I've had people tell me, my family helped me buy this car because otherwise I couldn't get a car or get transportation, but I can't ask them to help me with food every week. I've had people tell me that they have a car and a car loan, but they've lost their job and they're not going to sell their car in order to feed themselves. So there's a balance every week. I still have to pay my car payment, and that helps me get to the food shelf or food pantry or, Veggie Van Go to get food.
Mm-hmm.
But if I sell my car, then I can't get that either, but I might have some more money for a little while, right? And so I think these are really hard decisions that our neighbors are making all the time. And I understand where that question is coming from. And I do understand what you're saying about financial management. I think financial management often comes from a place of a scarcity mentality, right? Not having enough, but needing to do this and maybe not having enough to make a great decision about that. So making a decision about this, right? Like it often comes from this place of having a set of not so great choices and trying to make the best of those choices, as opposed to maybe the choices that you and I have, which are a set of better choices. And I think it's a balance. And I really challenge myself and others to consider the complexity of everyone's life and why they may have made those choices. And understand that food is like 3 meals a day, 365 days a year. And it is one of the very few no barrier social service programs that we have available to folks, and is an easy and often very accessible way for folks to save a few dollars when they really are desperate.
I agree. And that's what we're just speaking about, because I have employees that I watch what they do, and it's like, oh, but I don't have any food. Well, you just went out and got a $300 tattoo. You got to put your life in perspective. And it's hard for us that manage well. And well, I'm hungry. Well, you got to manage better. So I know it's hard for the food bank to take that in consideration, but for our constituents, I hear from that, and it's like, how do we address that somebody's doing that? Because I still, just like you said, I want to see everybody fed. But if you're mismanaging your life, it's hard for me to give and give when you continually do it over again. So that's what I have in mind. What you're doing is great. Support it. We'll continue to support it. But it's hard when you have constituents that come and say, hey, what can we do about this?
You and I should have a separate conversation outside of the committee. Perhaps there are some resources for that the CAP agencies offer around financial literacy and financial planning that have helped folks who are often in that situation.
I would also say, because I am on the board of the Upper Valley Haven, which partakes in food. The number of people that abuse the system is negligible. There are people who do it. I'm not saying that, but the number as far as percentage, and sometimes we focus on that as far as the number of people, that small minority, because they do it, then the greater good of the number that it actually helps. And if we can, kind of get past that, which I understand the frustration of it, because it is a frustration. I think we serve the greater good by doing it.
I think sometimes you have to ask the question. And I think sometimes you have to ask the question and hear the answer. And because, you serve everybody. Everybody, there's some people out there that might feel that way, or might feel this way, or feel that way, or feel this way. So, I just think that, anytime that you need to, form a, decision or move in a direction, you gotta hear it all. So,
Certainly happy to continue to answer those hard questions.
I appreciate all of that.
It was a hard question to ask, but I've been asked to ask.
Well, it is,
And it's
and
important.
it all is, and it all is, and again, you're gonna talk about it all, right? That's what we do, so.
Should we switch to Maddie?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you all for having me back today.
Thanks for coming back, good to see you in person.
Yes, nice to see you too. All right, so I want to share a little bit about the agricultural aspect of the roadmap. As we know, farms are central to our culture and our community here in Vermont, and central to achieving food security. So we know that Vermont farmers are struggling with profitability at the same time that too many of our neighbors can't afford the food that they need. So the roadmap lays out a path where we can address the really dual and intersecting challenges of farm viability and food security at the same time. So here are some quotes that we heard from folks that we reached out to and talked with in developing the roadmap. First, someone said, if we can find a way to feed people healthfully and affordably and keep their dollars in Vermont, that would be the gold standard. A farmer said, I haven't really raised my prices in many, many years, and the cost of everything has gone up. I want lower income people to have access to organic, nutrient-dense food, and so how do I still make a living and make my product affordable? I can say specifically in our work at NOFA, this is something we hear all the time. A lot of our farmers really go above and beyond to set their prices and to market their products and to do their work in a community in a way that makes it accessible to as many people as possible. And they are facing the same pressures around inflation and supply chain disruptions and increasing costs that so many other folks are, and they aren't always in a position to be able to pass those costs on. So it's a challenge that a lot of farmers struggle with. And then finally, someone said, I feel confident about farmers' ability to grow lots of delicious, nutritious food. It's about who has the money to access it. All right, and some data for you on the agriculture side of things. According to the 2022 economic census, Vermont's food system generated over $14.4 billion in direct economic impact, including $1.6 billion in direct wages. And I have to say, beyond this economic impact, and I touched on this a little bit in our introduction of NOFA on Tuesday, our farmers and food producers provide so many other benefits to Vermont communities as well. They contribute to our collective food security and climate change resiliency. They shorten supply chains. They strengthen rural economies. They build soil health, and they play important roles in civic life and so much more. I always feel the need to sort of fill in that gap because we focus a lot on economic impact and it is critical. And it's really important to remember what the data often doesn't talk about as much, which is all those other benefits of farms. Unfortunately, so many of our farms here in Vermont are struggling to stay profitable or to become profitable. In 2022, 4,364 farms under 140 acres, which represents 66.8% of Vermont farms, accounted for just over 78% of farms with net negative cash incomes. So essentially what this is saying is that particularly a lot of our smaller farms are really struggling with profitability. And I will say again, anecdotally, this is something we hear from farmers all the time. And it's not just the teeny tiny farms that are hobby farms that are, more on the homestead scale. It's a lot of commercial enterprises, and oftentimes it's sort of, you wouldn't know it from knowing a farmer as, you know, the pillar of the community that they often are, or as someone who, you know, a farmer who's lifted up as really an example of success in agriculture. Too many of those farmers are struggling right now, and we have to figure out how to address that. And then finally, as I talked about a little bit, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about already this session, catastrophic flooding in 2023 caused $44.7 million in damage and losses to the state's farm businesses. And fortunately, the state was able to provide some meaningful relief through the VGAP program in 2023 and again in 2024. We have learned from this experience, and we can use what we learned to move forward in a better direction. And now we're going to share a little bit more about our policy requests this year to keep us on the road to food security. These are organized into 3 specific issue areas, all of which again are intersecting food access, agriculture, and community priorities. And I have to say too, lest you think we are all doom and gloom based on some of that data, we are not. We feel, I think, and I can speak for the coalition as a whole, and I will say personally, incredibly hopeful. Doing this work requires that we are hopeful, and it reinforces that hope all the time, because we get to work with people who are doing incredible things to make these circumstances better. So the roadmap shows us the way to achieve full food security for Vermont by 2035, and these priorities are the next steps that we need to take in this journey together in order to move closer to a vision, our shared vision of a food secure Vermont, where everyone has the food they need and want, and farms have the resources to be resilient. These are our specific priorities for 2025. And we hope you'll join us in supporting them. So first, passing legislation to implement the SNAP Restaurant Meals Program in Vermont, including funding for administration and restaurant equipment costs. The Restaurant Meals Program, for anyone who's not familiar, is a state option for SNAP, also known as 3 Squares Vermont. In our state, this program would allow 3 Squares recipients who are over the age of 60, have a disability, or are unhoused to use their benefits to purchase ready-made meals at participating restaurants. Secondly, we are asking the legislature to fund Vermont Food Bank's request for $1.75 million in base funding to support responsive readiness, thank you, and $3.25 million for food purchase and distribution. Vermont Food Bank has been acting as an informal partner for the state for years, and with this request, we are asking the state to formalize that relationship and fund that support with this base appropriation and additional funding to support food purchase. This is really reflective also of the increasing rates of food insecurity that the food bank is responding to. And then finally, as we talked about a little bit on Tuesday as well, increasing public investment for NOFA Vermont's Crop Cash Plus and Farm Share programs to $500,000 in base funding. The Crop Cash and Farm Share programs will allow more Vermonters to access healthy local food while supporting farmers in their communities and circulating dollars in the local economy. In terms of the agriculture priorities specifically, as I mentioned the other day too, we are asking the legislature to pass the Farm Security Fund, which will support farmers in recovering from climate emergencies and extreme weather events. And that will build on the success that we experienced from the VGAP program. And then secondly, we're asking the legislature to fully fund the work of the Land Access and Opportunity Board, which is a state structure currently housed within the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board that supports marginalized people and communities with financial and other resources that they need to gain access to land and housing. And then finally, we are asking the legislature to expand and increase accessibility to the Vermont Earned Income Tax Credit and the Vermont Child Tax Credit. These anti-poverty tax credits increase financial stability for Vermont families so they can cover their basic needs, live with dignity, and build stronger communities. The child tax credit and the earned income tax credit help the lowest income Vermonters fill the gap between income and expenses while providing cash that they need when they file their taxes. And then finally, converting the $323,000 in one-time funding for Vermont 211 to base funding. There are certainly other priorities that complement this work, including work on affordable housing, as we've mentioned, and sheltering our unhoused neighbors, work on transportation, and others that are named in the roadmap. So we really encourage you to look closely at the roadmap yourselves and consider how your lives, the lives of your constituents and your communities would be improved and impacted by all of this work. And we welcome your feedback.
So as far as all of this is all brand new. This is a brand new initiative as far as the 2035 initiative. I guess my question is, have you been before this committee before? Because we're all brand new. Have you been before this committee before, in this capacity and received funding from the state?
The answer to that, my understanding, would be different for different priorities included here. So some of these priorities have been funded by the state in the past, whether at the same level or a different level, and some of them are new. And the roadmap itself is not brand new. It was first introduced to the legislature during the last session, I believe, right, 2024. But it also builds on ongoing work. So like Becca mentioned at the introduction, it builds on the work of the Vermont Agri-Strategic Plan, which runs from 2020 to 2030. And it builds on other existing initiatives like the Climate Action Plan and the Governor's Commission on the Future of Agriculture. So some of this is a new initiative, but it's really building on lots of other foundational work that's been around.
And I think one way to think about it, and Senator Collmore, you heard our presentation last year, I think it's taking things that have been somewhat siloed in the past and weaving them together in a way that helps all of us work more in collaboration to meet these sort of multifaceted goals around community, around agriculture, and around food security. So, you know, some of the things in here are somewhat new. Some of them are really just a new way to look at solutions that are also included in these other plans that Maddie's describing.
I can say specifically too, as someone who's really mostly worked on agriculture and is, you know, focused or knows the most about the ag priorities here. It's interesting that we really have to work to make the connection between the work our farmers do and our agricultural sector with food security. I think there are too many folks who take for granted that food comes from farms and that we need our farms to thrive as businesses in order to keep that food on people's tables. And we need specific programs and policy changes to make it more accessible to folks. So to Carrie's point, really weaving these areas of work and these needs together is incredibly important, and to have it tied to food security on the timeline of the roadmap kind of puts a different sense of urgency and focus on it that we feel is really needed.
So what would you say that the increase of what you're asking for? I can see, I know what you're doing. I can see the urgency of what you're trying to get to. I can understand that there's some monies here, there's monies there, and all of that. What do you think? What do you think the increase as far as the amount of monies that you have received from this committee in previous years versus what you're asking now? What do you think that increase is? Because those are things we need to understand. We need to understand about where the dollars are. We're not a money committee, but we are a committee that, you know, that handles money as far as requests and stuff. I mean, we asked the same question before you guys got here. Okay, Agency of Agriculture. What's your money source? What do you have? You know, what do you handle? What do you do? You know, we find out, oh, they handle $57 billion worth of money. So when we're gotten groups coming in front of us, you know, trying to parse out as far as where our budgets go and all of that, where are we as far as an increase as far as where we were in previous years? Is that an easy question to answer? Or, and I'm not trying to,
Well, I think I could probably help answer that most clearly. Yeah, so last year, the two financial requests that are included again this year that were funded were a request for the Vermont Food Bank. That money actually did not come out of the agriculture budget. It ended up going through the DCF budget line.
And that's the reason why we asked that, because if we can't do it here, where else can we go?
Well,
so I'm not trying to pin you down to like, oh shoot, we didn't succeed there. Well, maybe you did succeed there, but we weren't able to get you there, but we were able to put you someplace else.
Yeah.
So that's why we asked the question.
And I think there's a little bit of complexity there as well about jurisdiction over food issues and food security issues. And when you look at and read the roadmap, I suspect each of you will be able to see a very clear connection to the agriculture committee work that you're doing. But I suspect that you will also see connections to your afternoon committee work. So I think offering that, that you bring both of those lenses to this when you flip through this document is really critical. And is part of the process of how the Vermont Food Bank came asking for dollars for food purchase, ended up in the DCF budget, but is actually spending those dollars through our Vermonters Feeding Vermonters program with Vermont farms. So maybe not entirely logical, but really a good outcome. That request last year was for $5 million. We received 1.3 million. We're again asking for a total of 5. And it could be spread through various budget lines. NOFA last year also came asking for about $500,000. You got 370?
We had 300.
300.
Our ask was 478,000.
That's what it was, yeah. So roughly a $200,000 gap between last year and
Right,
this
and
year.
that's the same question we asked Milka the other day when you were on the screen and all that stuff. And for anybody that's watching from home, or for anybody that's gonna come back in again on another capacity, this committee is always gonna ask that.
Mhm.
And it's, because it's our obligation to the taxpayer and to everyone else, but it's also our obligation to you to say, again, as I said just a few minutes ago, if we don't have it here, and it's something that we absolutely positively believe as a committee that we think that this should go forward, let us help you find your path forward. We've done that over and over and over again in our other committees. That's why we asked the question.
And before we finish, I just want to offer the other piece that was funded last year that is asking for funding again is the Land Access and Opportunity Board that very clearly fits within your committee structure. They received $1 million last year. I don't have the exact number in front of me that they're asking for this year, but we can get back to the committee with that information. We have it. I suspect it will be something within the relative ballpark of that.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm sorry that I'm getting into a little bit of the weeds with this. For the SNAP, for the SNAP restaurant, how do you determine what restaurants or they can go to, and then what foods they can purchase?
Do you mind if I step out of this chair and offer it to Autumn so she can answer?
Whatever you guys want to
Answer
do.
you. Yeah, why don't you come answer that, Autumn?
Here, no, you sit here.
Okay.
You stay here.
You stay in
Hi.
That's a great question. So the state can tailor the SNAP Restaurant Meals Program to be kind of whatever we want it to be, which I think is a really good strength of the program. So a few other states have it and they all operate in different ways, but we would be able to say, like, we want certain criteria to, have a restaurant qualify. So maybe they serve local foods, or they're in, a rural part of the state where there aren't a lot of restaurants there. Or maybe they are in a city where there's a high need for the program. Maybe there's a high unhoused population there. So we want to include restaurants in that area. So we can really tailor it however we want to. And then to answer your question, was it what foods they can buy there? There wouldn't be any restrictions on what folks can buy there. Again, this program is really to offer choice and flexibility for people when they're going to get meals. But there would be a requirement that the restaurants have menu options that are lower price. So whether that is something that already exists on their menu and that's just something they offer to everyone, or if they have they add a few extra things that would qualify for this. But there wouldn't be a separate menu that goes to folks who are paying with SNAP benefits. That's an added layer of stigma to have a different menu and all that. So we don't want any of those hoops for people to jump through, but there would be a requirement that they have a lower price point option on their menu.
And the reason I ask is that from an equity standpoint, I want to make sure that our rural Vermonters are able to access this program when they have to travel a certain amount of time, that we have restaurants that can serve them as well.
Yeah, and part of the ask is to include a restaurant meals program navigator position within DCF that would really help restaurants go through the application process, help the state onboard restaurants into the program, and they would be able to do outreach to hopefully every town, every community across Vermont, or at least every county, and make sure that there are restaurants all over the state that are participating, so folks, like you said, don't have to drive far to be able to access these meals. So.
Thank you.
Of course.
Mr. Chair, the $5 million figure, I assume that does not include the additional cost of SNAP program, expanding the SNAP program, or of the expansion of the tax credits?
No, and the tax credits is, so the restaurant meals program, the cost for that is essentially a position and some technical costs. So it's not one I know off the top of my head, but I should.
Yeah. Are you talking about the?
I got my question answered. It's
Yeah.
just yes or no on whether.
And the tax credit piece, just for clarity for others on the committee, the tax credit piece is not an expense. It would be essentially more support for outreach so that folks who are already eligible for those tax credits are more able to access them. And that is a challenge at our state level, that the lowest income folks who are eligible for those refundable tax credits are not always able.
I'll ask you afterwards about that.
Great.
I would just add too to that point that with the SNAP Restaurant Meals Program, all of the funding for benefits for folks is all federal
It's federal,
dollars.
yeah.
Yeah, so.
I wasn't asking
That's
about
okay, I
where
just
the
wanted
money
to,
was
yeah,
coming from.
totally, just wanted to reiterate that, because I think that's really important that money like gets
Yeah.
to go back into our
Yeah.
economy.
Well, good.
Great.
What else?
I'm gonna just breeze through the end of our presentation here,
Absolutely.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't need the comfy chair. I'm great. So I want to reiterate the partners around the state and just, you've met a number of us here today. I'm sure you will meet Ellen and Jake from the Sustainable Jobs Fund. And I'm just going to go through some of the faces that you're going to see in the State House. And I really want you to consider these folks resources. We're here to help you unpack this document. We're here to help you understand the intersections with this committee's work and other committees' work. And hopefully you will start to recognize us as you see us more frequently. So Autumn and Honor Horton are going to be here to support from Hunger Free Vermont. Maddie and Grace are both here today, but you have already met Joanna and you may meet Jessica as well.
And I would ask this too, and I don't want to stop you, I would ask all of you, when you see us in the hallway, introduce yourself again. Tell us who you are and do that because it really, really helps. We're seeing a lot of people. It's a fire hose. And
Yeah.
so don't be afraid to, because you can get to your conversation and it helps to know what we're talking about other than us saying, oh, yeah. You know, just don't be afraid to say, oh, yeah, you remember, yeah, so.
This is why we've included our photos for
Yeah,
you. So it's
exactly.
not just names
And it
on the
helps.
screen.
And it helps.
You met John and I yesterday. Ellen and Jake should be in if they have not yet been here already from the Sustainable Jobs Fund. Monica Collins volunteers with a small organization called Feeding the Valley Alliance and has been absolutely critical to our understanding of communities she represents communities in the Mad River, the southern part of the Mad River Valley. So a bunch of very small, very rural communities that have some unique food access challenges around, among other things. And then Becca Warren, who is our Fearless Food Security Coalition manager. And just a lot of gratitude for all of you for having us here, for your really great questions, and for the work that we're going to be able to do together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming in. Nice to meet all you folks.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. Well, cool. What else do we have here?
That's it for today, unless there are further questions.
Okay, everybody all good?
I'm good.
Thank you. You guys have a great day.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.